It started on a Tuesday, the kind of day where the rain never quite stopped, but never really poured either. The hallway was slick with damp shoes and the smell of wet jackets, and I was running late for English. I slipped into my seat just as the bell rang, shaking water from my hair and hoping Mrs. Ellison wouldn't notice. That's when I heard it for the first time, a whisper, so soft it was almost lost in the shuffle of chairs and the hum of fluorescent lights. I turned, scanning the room. Most of my classmates were settling in, laughing or scribbling notes, but at the back, hunched over his desk, sat Caleb. He was new, or at least I had never noticed him before. His hair was dark and messy, and his eyes never left his hands. I tried to focus on Mrs. Ellison's lecture about Romeo and Juliet, but the whispers kept pulling me back. At first I thought he was just talking to himself, maybe rehearsing lines, but the longer I listened, the stranger it felt. His voice was low and urgent, as if he was arguing with someone only he could see. "You don't belong here," he muttered. "I'll find out soon enough." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to have noticed. The girl beside me was doodling in her notebook, her pencil scratching softly. The boy in front of me was slumped over, half asleep. It was just me and Caleb, connected by his secret whispers. At lunch, I found myself watching him. He sat alone, as always, at the end of a long table. He didn't eat. He just stared at his tray, his lips moving silently. No one approached him. No one even looked his way. It was like he was invisible. I tried to talk to him once after class. I caught him by the lockers, where the light was dim and the noise of the hallway muffled his voice. "Hey," I said, "are you okay?" He flinched as if I'd startled him. His eyes darted around wide and wild. "You didn't hear anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't hear me?" I nodded, pretending not to understand, but the fear in his eyes stayed with me. The whispers didn't stop. Every day, Caleb would sit at the back of the room, his voice a constant, unsettling murmur. Sometimes he'd laugh softly, as if sharing a joke with someone I couldn't see. Other times he'd argue, his tone sharp and desperate. One afternoon, I stayed late to finish an assignment. The classroom was empty except for Caleb, who sat in the far corner, his whispers louder than ever. "She knows," he said. "She knows, she knows." I froze, my heart pounding. Was he talking about me? I gathered my things and left as quietly as I could, but his voice followed me down the hall. The next day, Caleb was gone. No one mentioned him. No one seemed to remember him at all. I had a randomly assigned roommate in college who was a very sweet, religious girl. She kept to herself mostly, but she was always really kind and polite. This was the first year I didn't seem to have a B*chi roommate, so I was excited to get along with her. About 2 nights after we get moved in, I wake up to hear someone sobbing softly outside my bedroom door. It was a really weird sound, this kind of desperate, creaky sobbing. And I was so f***ing scared at first because it sounded like the shti you hear in horror movies. I heard someone moving around the apartment and occasionally coming back to my door, scratching on it softly, so I finally summoned the courage to peek out of my bedroom. My roommate was just walking around the apartment crying. She was sleepwalking, apparently, because her eyes were closed. But when I opened the door, her head turned to look right at me. Then she slowly went to the kitchen table, picked up a pencil, and started to scrawl this weird symbol on her door. It looked like a circle with a triangle in it. I asked her if she was okay, and she just stood there, swaying and crying. I was basically just like, nope, and locked the door. The next morning, she was really scared and mad at me because this demon symbol had appeared on her door, and she thought I had done it to prank her. She didn't believe me when I told her she was the one who did it, but accepted my denials that I did it, and we dropped it. Several times throughout the year, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to her in the kitchen talking to herself. Every time she would come to scratch softly on my door, and every morning there would be another symbol on her door. She was still convinced it was me f***ing with her. I considered filming her. Honestly, I was really scared of opening the door, because I watched too many scary movies about demons and sh**t. Then one time, we were in our separate dorm rooms when there was a huge bang from her bathroom. There was obviously no one else in the dorm, so we were both really freaked out, but we decided to investigate. We looked everywhere and nothing had fallen down. There were no windows or other doors to the bathroom other than the one leading to our living room. We pulled back the shower curtain, and there was a huge arc of blood on the wall. She went pale but had no explanation for this. Later that night, while I was studying in total silence, she rushed into my room and demanded to know what I had said. I asked her what she was talking about. She said she was in the bathroom and heard me talking to her like I was whispering something through the wall. Nope. After that, whenever she was gone for the weekend, I always heard weird noises coming from her side of the dorm suite in the middle of the night. Nope. 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 She moved out at the end of the year, and that was that. But I've always wondered what the F***CK that was all about. It started as a joke, just something we'd heard in whispers between classes. The old urban high school I attended had a reputation for being haunted, especially the basement stairwell. Rumor had it that if you went down there at midnight and whispered a name, you'd see a shadowy figure, something out of those Japanese school ghost stories that always made the rounds online. One Friday night, after a football game, a group of Usmai, Jess, Ryan, Maria found ourselves lingering in the school parking lot, too wired to go home. Someone mentioned the legend, and before we knew it, we were daring each other to try it. The school was dark and silent except for the distant hum of traffic. We slipped in through a side door, left unlocked for cleaning crews, and made our way to the basement. The stairwell was narrow, with flickering fluorescent lights and peeling paint. The air smelled of mildew and old paper. Jess pulled out a flashlight. "'Kay, one of us has to go down. Whisper a name and wait," she said. "If you see something, run." Ryan volunteered. He swallowed hard and started down the stairs. The rest of us watched from the landing, our hearts pounding. At the bottom, Ryan whispered a name his own. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from above, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the floor above us. Maria gasped. "There's no one up there," she hissed. The footsteps got louder, echoing in the empty stairwell. My skin prickled. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Ryan looked up, his face pale. "Did you guys do that?" he called. We shook our heads. The footsteps stopped. Then from the top of the stairs, a shadow moved. A tall, indistinct figure, just standing there, watching us. We bolted. Up the stairs, through the halls, out the door, and into the night. We didn't stop until we were back in the parking lot, panting and laughing nervously. No one ever admitted to playing a prank, and none of us ever went back to that stairwell after dark. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the school, I think I hear those footsteps again. And I wonder if the ritual worked, or if something was already waiting for us down there. It was a Tuesday in 7th grade, and the bus ride home was just like any other allowed. Crowded and full of the usual mix of laughter and shouting, I found my usual spot near the middle, next to a friend, and tried to ignore the chaos around us. Then something happened that I still can't forget. Across the aisle, a girl I didn't know very well, let's call her Emily, was sitting with a boy from our grade. They weren't usually friends, but today they were whispering together, their voices low but urgent. I glanced over, curious, but tried not to stare. Then, clear as anything, I heard Emily say, "Stab me." At first, I thought I'd misheard, but she said it again, her voice steady, almost calm. "Stab me. Right here." She pointed to her leg. The boy looked at her, confused, then nervous. "Are you serious?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Yeah, do it. Want to see what it feels like." There was a pause. The rest of the bus was still noisy, but it felt like a bubble of silence had formed around us. The boy hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something, a pen, a pocket knife. I couldn't tell, but whatever it was, he pressed it against Emily's leg. Emily winced, but she didn't move away. The boy looked shocked at what he'd done and quickly pulled back. Emily's jeans had a small mark, but I couldn't see if she was bleeding. The moment passed so fast, but the shock of it lingered. The bus was still moving, the driver oblivious, the other kids still shouting and laughing. But for those of us who saw it, the air felt thick with something I couldn't name: fear, confusion, or maybe just the realization that things could change in an instant. When we got off the bus, Emily walked away like nothing had happened. The boy stayed behind, staring at his hands. I wanted to say something, to ask if she was okay, but the words stuck in my throat. It began as a whisper, something about the water bottles in Mrs. Patel's classroom tasting strange. Most students brushed it off, thinking it was just the plastic or the heat. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. Leela was known for being quiet and reserved, always sitting near the back, her head buried in her books. She rarely spoke unless called on, and when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Most of her classmates barely noticed her until the day everything went wrong. The victim, Priya, was one of the brightest students in the class. She always had the highest marks, and her name was called out for every award. Lila, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, and the pressure to excel weighed heavily on her. Over time, resentment festered. One Monday, during a break between classes, Priya reached for her water bottle and took a sip. Almost immediately, she made a face. "This tastes weird," she muttered to her friend. By the end of the period, Priya was pale and sweating. She clutched her stomach and asked to go to the nurse. In the nurse's office, Priya started vomiting uncontrollably. The nurse called her parents, and she was rushed to the hospital. Doctors ran tests and found traces of a toxic substance, liquid mosquito repellent, in her system. Priya was kept overnight for observation, but thankfully she recovered.
And back at school, rumors spread like wildfire.
Classmates whispered about who could have done such a thing. The principal called an emergency assembly, urging anyone with information to come forward. At first, no one spoke up. But then, a classmate remembered seeing Lila near Priya's bag just before break. When questioned, Lila denied everything, but her hands trembled and her eyes darted around the room. The school checked the security footage and saw Leela pouring something into Priya's water bottle, then quickly hiding the evidence in another student's bag. When confronted, Lila broke down. She admitted she had been jealous of Priya's success and wanted to teach her a lesson. She said she didn't mean to hurt her so badly just to make her sick for a day. The principal called the police, and Lila was suspended. The incident left the entire school shaken. Teachers held meetings about bullying and mental health, and students were reminded to never leave their drinks unattended. Priya returned to school a week later, but things were never quite the same. Leela was transferred to another school, and her classmates wondered how someone so quiet could do something so terrible. It was third period on a Tuesday, and the shop class smelled of sawdust and machine oil.
Oh.
Sunlight filtered in through the high, dusty windows, casting long shadows across the workbenches. I was sanding the edge of a birdhouse, the hum of the belt sander drowning out most of the chatter. That's when I heard a sharp shout from the other side of the room. I looked up just in time to see Jake, the quiet kid. Always sat in the back, standing by the bandsaw. It wasn't working on anything. He was just staring at the blade, his eyes glazed over, his posture slack. At first, I thought he was daydreaming. Then, without warning, he reached out and pressed his hand toward the spinning blade. There was a sickening crunch, followed by a moment of eerie silence. Jake didn't scream. He barely even flinched. He just stood there, his face pale, staring at his hand. Blood dripped onto the sawdust-covered floor, and I realized with a jolt that the tip of his finger was gone. The room erupted into chaos. Someone shouted for the teacher. Another student ran to the office. But Jake, still eerily calm, turned and walked toward the door, cradling his injured hand. He looked dazed, almost as if he was sleepwalking. "I need to go home," he said, his voice flat. The teacher rushed over, his face white. He grabbed a wad of shop towels and wrapped Jake's hand, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. The rest of us stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Some kids looked away, others crowded closer, morbidly curious. By the time the paramedics arrived, Jake was sitting on a bench outside, still silent, still staring at nothing. The ambulance lights flashed blue and red across the shop windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. Later, we found out Jake had been struggling with something none of us knew about. He never talked much, and no one really knew him. But that day, the whole school was talking about the blood, about the shock, about how quickly things can change. For weeks afterward, the shop class felt different. The teachers were more vigilant, the safety talks more serious. And every time I walked past the bandsaw, I thought of Jake, and the way he'd looked at his hand like he wasn't even there. The accident became a legend, whispered about in the halls. Some said Jake was under the influence, others said he just snapped. But no one really knew. All we knew was that, in a single moment, everything had changed. And none of us would forget the day the quiet kid in the back lost a piece of himself in shop class. It started as just another day at Lincoln, high until it wasn't. I'd heard the whispers for weeks, something brewing between Mark and Derek. Two guys who'd been at each other's throats since the start of the year. Normally, it was just trash talk in the hallways, but today felt different. The tension was thick, like the air before a storm. I was sitting in the cafeteria, picking at my fries, when I saw Mark walk in. His face was set, his hands clenched at his sides. He wasn't with his usual group. He was alone, and he looked angry. Derek was at the other end of the room, surrounded by friends, laughing too loud as if he knew something was about to happen. Mark cut through the crowd, his eyes locked on Derek. The chatter around me died down as people noticed, sensing trouble. I saw a few kids exchange glances, some pulling out their phones, ready to film whatever was coming. That's when Mark pulled out a knife, small but unmistakable, glinting under the cafeteria lights. He held it at his side, but everyone saw it. The room went quiet. Even the teachers, who were usually quick to break up fights, seemed frozen in place. "You want to settle this?" Mark said, his voice low and shaking. "Let's settle it." Derek stood up, his bravado fading as he saw the knife. "Man, you're crazy," he said, backing away. "Put that down." For a moment, no one moved. Then a teacher, Mr. Harris, stepped in, his voice firm but calm. Mark put the knife down now. Mark's hand trembled, and for a second I thought he might lunge. But then his shoulders slumped. He dropped the knife on the table, and Mr. Harris grabbed it, his face pale. The rest of the staff herded us out of the cafeteria, and the police were called. We spent the rest of the day in lockdown, huddled in our classrooms, whispering about what had happened. Rumors spread that Mark had brought the knife because he was tired of being pushed around, tired of the fights, tired of feeling like no one had his back. Later, we found out Mark was suspended, and the school brought in counselors to talk to us about conflict resolution and the dangers of bringing weapons to school. But the fear from that day stayed with me, the sight of the knife, the silence in the cafeteria, the realization that anything could happen anytime. After that, the hallways felt different. People were more careful, more aware. And every time I saw Mark's empty seat, I wondered if anyone had really tried to help him before things got that bad. It started with whispers in the hallway, rumors about a boy named Jose, who always sat alone in the back of class, scribbling in a notebook no one was allowed to see. He was quiet, almost invisible, till the day everything changed. I first noticed something was off when I saw him watching Sarah, a girl in our homeroom, a little too closely. He'd stare at her hair, sometimes reaching out as if to touch it, then pulling his hand back at the last second. No one paid much attention at first. We were all busy with homework and gossip, and Jose was just another face in the crowd. Then, one afternoon, Sarah came to class, looking shaken. She told me and a few friends that Jose had cornered her in the library. He'd shown her a small Ziploc bag with a lock of dark hair inside. "It's yours," he'd said, smiling. "I took it when you weren't looking." Sarah laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Then Jose rolled up his sleeve, revealing fresh cuts on his arm. He placed the lock of hair on one of the wounds and said, "Now you're mine." He told her not to tell anyone, or something bad would happen. We didn't know what to do. Sarah was scared, but she didn't want to make a scene. She begged us not to tell the teachers, worried about what Jose might do. But the rumors spread anyway. Other girls started checking their hair, looking over their shoulders in the hallway. A few days later, another girl, Mia, found a note in her locker. It was signed by Jose and said, "I have your hair too. Don't tell anyone, or you'll regret it." Mia was in tears. She showed us the note, and we realized this wasn't just about Sarah anymore. That's when we decided to tell our homeroom teacher. She listened, her face growing pale, and promised to take it seriously. The school called in Jose's parents and searched his backpack. They found more Ziploc bags, each with a lock of hair, and a notebook filled with the names of girls in our class. There were notes next to some names things, like Next and mine. Jose was expelled. The principal held an assembly to talk about safety and respect, but the damage was done. For weeks, we were all on edge, checking our hair, watching the shadows in the hallway. The incident left a mark on all of us, a reminder that sometimes the quiet ones can be the most unsettling. Sarah and Mia both saw the school counselor. They said it helped, but they still jumped at sudden noises and avoided the library. As for the rest of us, we learned to pay attention not just to the loud, obvious threats, but to the quiet ones, the ones that creep up when you least expect them. It was one of those stories that became legend in our school, not just because of the violence, but because of the shock that rippled through the halls afterward. I didn't see it happen, but I heard the screams, and that's something you don't forget. It started with rumors about a guy everyone called Travis. He wasn't a student, but he hung around the school a lot, especially after classes let out. He was older, maybe in his early 20s, and he always had a crowd of kids around him. At first I thought he was just another guy trying to look cool, but then I heard the whispers. Travis was selling drugs. Pills, weed, sometimes even something stronger. He had a reputation for being untouchable, always slipping away before anyone could catch him. School knew about him, but he was careful. He never dealt on school property, always just outside the gates or in the parking lot across the street. The teachers and security guards tried to keep an eye out, but Travis was good at staying one step ahead. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. A group of seniors guys who were known for being tough, for not taking crap from anyone, decided they'd had enough. They'd heard Travis was selling to younger kids, and they didn't like it. There was a fight, and it spilled over into one of the apartment buildings near the school. I was walking home with a friend when we heard shouting from above. We looked up just in time to see a commotion on the second-floor balcony. There was Travis, his face twisted in fear, and a couple of the seniors, their faces red with anger. There was a scuffle, and then before anyone could react, Travis was pushed over the railing. He fell hard, landing on the grass below with a sickening thud. For a moment, there was silence. Then the screaming started. Kids ran in every direction, some calling for help, others just running away. The seniors bolted, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop them. Travis lay there, groaning, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Someone called an ambulance, and the police showed up soon after. The story spread like wildfire. Some people said Travis had it coming, that he was preying on kids and deserved what he got. Others were horrified, saying no one should be thrown off a balcony, no matter what they'd done. The seniors were eventually caught. They claimed they were just trying to scare Travis, that they never meant for him to get hurt. But the damage was done. Travis survived, but he never came back to the school. The incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. For weeks afterward, the school held assemblies about violence and drug use. The teachers talked about the importance of speaking up, of not taking the law into your own hands. But the real lesson was in the air, the way everyone looked over their shoulders, the way the whispers in the halls took on a new edge. It was a story that stuck with all of us, a reminder that even in a place that's supposed to be safe, danger can come from anywhere, even from the people you least expect. It was supposed to be a fun trip, just me and my friends, celebrating the end of exams with a weekend in the city. We found a cute little Airbnb with great reviews, right in the heart of downtown. The photos showed a cozy living room, a modern kitchen, and bedrooms that looked like something out of a magazine. We booked it without a second thought. When we arrived, the building was older than we expected, but not in a bad way. There was charm in the worn wooden floors and the tall, narrow windows. We dragged our bags up 3 flights of stairs and found the apartment at the end of the hall. The lockbox was easy to open, and soon we were inside, laughing and unpacking. That first night, everything seemed fine. We ordered pizza, watched movies, and joked about the weird art on the walls, a series of black and white photos of the city, each one a little too grainy, a little too blurry. But as the night wore on, I started to notice little things that didn't add up. The fridge made a strange humming noise, and the bathroom door didn't quite close all the way. Nothing major, just enough to make me feel a little uneasy. We went to bed late, tired from the drive and the excitement of being in a new place. I was sharing a room with my friend Sam, and we fell asleep almost instantly. That's when the nightmare really began. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. At first I thought it was just a bad dream, but then I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Quiet, shuffling, like someone was trying not to be heard. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped outside our door. I nudged Sam, but she was sound asleep. The door handle rattled, just a little, and then the footsteps moved on. I lay there, frozen, wondering if I'd imagined it. The next morning I told my friends what had happened. They laughed it off, saying it was probably just the building settling, or someone else in the apartment complex. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We spent the day exploring the city, and by the time we got back, I'd almost forgotten about the night before. But when we walked into the apartment, the air felt different, thicker, heavier. The art on the walls seemed to glare at us, the faces in the photos blurring into something almost sinister. That night I made sure to lock our bedroom door. Sam fell asleep quickly again, but I stayed up listening. A shadow passed under the door, and I saw a pair of feet standing there, not moving. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. The next morning I told my friends again. This time, they believed me. We searched the apartment, looking for anything out of place. In the back of the closet, we found a small crawl space, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. Inside, there were newspapers and pictures of previous guests, each one marked with a date. Some of the photos were recent, too recent. We packed our bags and left, calling the host and Airbnb as soon as we were outside. The host claimed to know nothing about the crawl space or the photos. Airbnb offered us a refund, but the listing stayed up. But I still have nightmares about the sound of footsteps in the hallway and the shadow under the door. And I'll never forget the photos in that hidden crawl space. Each one a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't explain. It was supposed to be just another field trip, a day out in the woods, away from fluorescent lights and math quizzes. We were all excited, even Ethan, who usually kept to himself. He was quiet, the kind of kid who sat at the back of the bus, his nose in a book or his eyes fixed on the trees rushing by outside. The nature reserve was beautiful, all towering pines and winding trails. Our teacher, Mr. Reynolds, gave us the usual safety talk. Stay with your buddy, don't wander off, and if you get lost, just stay put and yell for help. We all nodded, eager to get started. At first, everything went smoothly. We hiked in small groups, pointing out birds and bugs, snapping pictures with our phones. Ethan was with us for a while, but somewhere along the trail, he fell behind. I remember looking back and seeing him pause, staring at something in the underbrush. I called his name, but he waved me on. I'll catch up, he said. Just want to look at something. We kept walking, thinking he'd be right behind us. Odd. But when we reached the next clearing, Ethan wasn't there. We waited a few minutes, then called for him. Nothing. No answer. No rustling in the bushes. No sign of him at all. Mr. Reynolds tried to stay calm, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He sent a few of us back down the trail to look, but there was no trace of Ethan. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic searching. Radio calls, and finally, the arrival of search and rescue teams with dogs and helicopters. Hours turned into days. The woods were combed from top to bottom, but Ethan was gone. His parents were devastated, his mom crying on the news every night, begging for anyone with information to come forward. The story made headlines, but as time passed, the searches grew less frequent, the news crews moved on, and life at school tried to return to normal. Then 2 days later, something impossible happened. Ethan reappeared at the school gates, covered in mud and leaves, his clothes torn, and his eyes wide with confusion. He was cold and dehydrated, but otherwise unharmed. The doctors checked him over, but he had no memory of what had happened after he left the trail. He just kept repeating, "They told me not to talk about it." No one could explain where he'd been or how he'd survived. The police questioned him, but Ethan couldn't give any answers. He seemed older somehow, like he'd seen things he couldn't put into words. After that, Ethan was different. He was even quieter than before, always looking over his shoulder, jumping at sudden noises. He never went back into the woods, and he never talked about the field trip again. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Ethan in those woods. The teachers say it's a reminder to always stay with your group. Bet the kids whisper about something darker, about the things that might be waiting in the shadows, just out of sight. He didn't really do anything that scary while he was with me, but he did bloody scare me after he was gone. I had just become the class teacher of 39th graders, in the middle of the school year, and had to tell a student that he was expelled, because he had only shown up to class 3 times in 6 months. We had a nice chat before that. I had told him I felt I was missing the bigger picture here as I was new to that class, but that I still felt bad because he did and seemed to be the kind of guy who just skipped classes because he did and feel like leaving his bed. He was very polite, thanked me for being gentle, shook my hand, turned around, and clocked another student, breaking his nose, ran out of the room and pepper sprayed the door area to cover his retreat, so that was awkward. Days later, I finally had time to go through the administrative files of my new students. His file was full of drawings. He liked to draw in class when he still came. He drew mainly AK-47s. He was born in Russia. We were in Western Europe. Around the AK-47s, love poems to the AK-47 in Russian, scenes of, well, AK-47s in action, and lists of fellow students. My predecessors had confiscated these drawings and his hit lists and put them away in a file that most people would uneven touch because it is mainly for documentation of things. You already know when you are their teacher. Nobody had told me that there might be a fucking problem waiting for me. Nobody had told the social worker of the school, probably because he didn't disrupt classes. Also, nobody had told me that the other student and his pals had bullied him relentlessly for a year before he decided to stay away from school. I guess I was untold that because no teacher knew as they had unfucking cared to find out. Why he was spending recess alone, sitting for himself with a 1,000-yard stare. I learned that when the other students had warmed up to me and started telling me things like this. Whispers in the hallway about a boy in Mr. Carter's class who did strange things when he got upset. But the first time I saw it happen, I realized the rumors didn't do it justice. His name was Daniel. He was quiet, always sitting at the back of the room, hunched over his desk like he was trying to disappear. He never raised his hand, never talked to anyone, unless he had to. Most of us didn't even notice him until that day in English class. We were taking a quiz, and the room was silent, except for the scratch of pencils on paper. Out of nowhere, Daniel stood up. He walked to the back wall where the lockers were, and just stood there for a moment. Then, without warning, he started banging his head against the wall. It wasn't a gentle tap. He hit his head hard, over and over, the sound echoing through the room. At first, everyone just stared, frozen in shock. Mr. Carter rushed over and tried to pull him away, but Daniel was stronger than he looked. Kept banging his head, his face twisted in something between anger and pain. By the time 2 more teachers arrived, Daniel's forehead was split open, blood trickling down his face and onto the wall. It took 3 adults to finally restrain him and lead him out of the room. The rest of us sat in stunned silence, the quiz forgotten. After that, it happened again. Not every day, but often enough that everyone knew about it. Sometimes it was in the hallway, sometimes in the bathroom. Once he did it in the cafeteria, right in the middle of lunch. The sound of his head hitting the wall was like a hammer, and the blood always left a dark smear behind. The school tried to help him. They called his parents, sent him to the counselor, even brought in a psychiatrist. But Daniel never talked about why he did it, just said he couldn't stop when he got upset. Rumors spread. Some said he was cursed. Some said he was possessed. Others said he just wanted attention. But I saw the look in his eyes when it happened. There was something real and raw there, something beyond words. Eventually, Daniel stopped coming to school. The official story was that he was getting help somewhere else, but no one really knew. The bloodstains on the walls were painted over, and life went on. He arrived in the middle of the semester, a transfer student whose presence was announced only by a brief introduction from the vice principal. "This is Alex," she said, gesturing to the tall, thin boy standing stiffly beside her. "Please make him feel welcome." What made Alex unforgettable wasn't his height or his silence. It was the mask. He wore a plain white surgical mask every day, covering the lower half of his face. At first, people assumed it was for health reasons, maybe allergies or a cold. But as weeks passed, the mask became a permanent fixture. He never took it off, not even at lunch or during gym class. When the teacher finally let him sit out after he refused to participate, Alex never spoke, not to teachers, not to classmates, not even when called on in class. He would simply stare, his dark eyes unblinking, until the teacher gave up and moved on. Some students tried to talk to him, but he would turn away or walk off. If he got too close, he'd growl low and guttural, like an animal warning you to back off. The strangest part was how he reacted when anyone tried to get him to remove the mask. Once a group of boys cornered him in the hallway, teasing him about hiding something ugly. Alex didn't respond at first. Then, suddenly, he lunged at one of them, biting the boy's hand hard enough to draw blood. The incident was reported, and Alex was sent to the principal's office. His parents were called, but they insisted he was just shy and needed time to adjust. Rumors spread. Some said he had a terrible scar. Others whispered that he was hiding a contagious disease. A few even speculated that he wasn't human at all, that the mask was hiding something monstrous. The more Alex refused to interact, the more the stories grew. Teachers tried to help, but Alex refused counseling. He would sit in the back of the room drawing strange symbols in his notebook or staring out the window. Sometimes he'd bang his fists on his desk, startling the class. Other times he'd just disappear, slipping out of the room during a lesson, only to be found hours later, sitting alone in the library or the janitor's closet. Eventually, Alex stopped coming to school. No one knew what happened to him. The official story was that his family had moved away, but the rumors lingered. Some students swore they saw him standing outside the school at night, still wearing the mask, watching the windows with those dark, unreadable eyes. I'm going to preface this by saying I went to boarding school for 6 years. This boarding school was in the middle of a one-stop-light town and on a hill 800 feet up. The school used to be an old monastery. It was hundreds of years old and huge, with 4 stories, including a basement where there was a boiler room and long hallways. Not all of these stories happened to myself, but the people who told me them were reliable enough to believe. Also, the school didn't want us telling stories to other people, because they were afraid that it would make them not want to go to the school due to it being haunted. The first one happened to me. I used to be in charge of cleaning the gymnasium at night. Every student had a job that they had to do either at night or in the morning to help take care of the school. It taught you some practical things and all. Anyway, I was there by myself that night, getting ready to start sweeping the gym. The gym had 2 floors to it. The upstairs part was the weightlifting area, and you could see it fully from the bottom part of the gym where the basketball court was. As I stepped into the gym, one of the basketballs starts rolling a bit. I look around to see if any doors are open. None are. I chalk it up to randomness, but see that it is continuing to roll. As I watch it, it makes a full circle around the entire gym and stops right next to my feet. At this point, I'm a bit scared, but figured it was nothing. I heard a creaking coming from the 2nd floor and look up. There's a girl there, just staring right at me. As soon as I made direct eye contact with her, she bolts to the stairs that would take her to me. She let out a scream that I cannot describe. I was terrified and froze in place. Thankfully, she didn't come to me, but took a left and bolted through the main doors of the gym. They didn't open. She just went right through them and noped the hell out of there. In late November, the kind of day where the sky was a flat, dull gray and the air smelled like wet pavement. I remember shuffling into the cafeteria, my backpack heavy with books, the chatter of students echoing off the linoleum floors. People were laughing, trading lunches, and arguing about homework. Just another day at Eastwood High. Then everything changed. I was sitting with my usual group, halfway through a dry sandwich, when I noticed Alex sitting alone at the end of a long table. He was a freshman, quiet and withdrawn, always on the edge of every group, but never really part of any. He kept his head down, his dark hair falling over his eyes, and he never smiled. I'd heard rumors kids called him names, shoved him in the hallways, left nasty notes in his locker, never fought back. That morning, though, something was different. Alex was muttering to himself, his hands shaking as he picked at his food. I wouldn't have noticed if it weren't for the way he kept glancing around, like he was waiting for something or someone. Then Jake, one of the louder kids in our group, leaned over and whispered, "Did you hear what Alex said to me in the hallway?" He smirked. He said he was going to end it all. I thought he was just being dramatic. A chill ran down my spine. I looked back at Alex. He was staring at his backpack, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. A few minutes later, the school went into lockdown. The principal's voice crackled over the intercom, telling us to stay in the cafeteria and remain calm. Nobody knew what was happening, but the fear was instant. Everyone started whispering, texting their parents, looking for the nearest exit. Then the police arrived. They moved through the cafeteria, their faces grim, and stopped at Alex's table. I watched as they asked him to stand up, saw the way his whole body trembled. One of the officers took his backpack and opened it. I'll never forget the look on his face, half relief, half terror, when the officer pulled out a small black handgun. The room went silent. Some kids started crying. Others just stared, wide-eyed and frozen. Later, we found out Alex had been bullied for months. He told the police he just wanted to feel safe, that he never planned to hurt anyone. But the fear he caused that day stayed with all of us. The school brought in counselors, held assemblies about bullying and mental health, and reminded us to speak up if we saw something wrong. For weeks afterward, the cafeteria felt different, quieter, more wary. And every time I saw an empty seat at the end of the table, I thought of Alex, and the gun, and the way a single moment can change everything.